Welcome to Figma 101. This is part 1 of 3. Click there. Over the 3 sessions we're going to do today's, which is a general intro to the core functionality. The second session is going to be around a design system approach and how we can cascade changes throughout the whole of our design files. And then the final session will be around design thinking and components. How do we build things so that we can change and edit quickly and cascade all the changes through our document. The aim for today's class is to understand the use cases of Figma, the benefits of using Figma over some of the other pieces of software, and then to know some of the basic functionality so we can hit the ground running and play with it after the session. So all of these tools, Figma, XD, and Sketch, are like new evolving tools that help us design websites and apps quickly and effectively. And unlike things like Photoshop and Illustrator that were never designed for it, these tools are explicitly designed for this digital development. And it means we can do things that we can't do with Photoshop and Illustrator, which involves creating clickable prototypes, sharing quickly or online, building editable components that edit in real time. And with all this software, we can do really basic stuff. So on the left, just doing a wireframe and showing that to the client. And we can use the same tools and software to quickly develop entire design versions of websites that have clickable prototypes. So we get to that phase where we can give something to the client really quickly. They can play with it and they get like the sense of it being nearly 80 or 90% there, so they can feedback at that stage rather than feedback when we're in the dev stage. I'm going to quickly jump in to just show you what some of these look like. So we're going to look at what we did for law tech. So we started off in the first phases of the project, just doing a wireframe of the entire site. So we've done like a skeleton plectica map. This page goes to here, it has this content. This menu bar goes to this page, has this content. And we just started to flesh it out to give a sense of the click-through. Helps you remember also the pages that you always forget, like privacy notices and cookies and things like that. It creates you a really basic web experience that you can talk through and how we might chunk up their content. From there, we can start to develop a whole system that looks beautiful, that's interactive, that we can turn into a clickable prototype. This one's been tidied up especially for the dev handover. And that's one of the key pieces of this software is there's actually quite a lot of usable data that developers can extract so that they can build quickly. So we went from wireframe to this design over the course of a few weeks, and it gave us an entire clickable website. You'll notice these grids, that's just to help break up components for the developers. We had a website, went through to some content, and now we're in the middle of that build phase. Actually, we're coming to the end of the build phase, and we have a fully developed website. It's like 95% the same as what we were developing in the Figma. So these content pages, all looks very similar. So some of the benefits of like Figma and Adobe is what you're able to do is create a standardized set of components that you can drag and drop so you can make consistent app screens over and over again. If you set it up correctly, you can create it so that font changes, color changes, dimensional changes cascade through the entire document. So you can change these global settings and it changes everything in your document, which is great for like tweaking stuff if the client changes their mind, but also as we move to doing more productization, it means we can do standardized products, but quickly skin it in different colors with different logos, and then give them something that they can play with very quickly. Almost within the same meeting session, if we had a product, we could skin it and start to show them what it could look like. You can build out a clickable prototype. It's just a few extra buttons to build it. There was one point a few years back where we'd make stuff in Illustrator, export it to PowerPoint, and then make a clickable version in PowerPoint. Gone are those days, and now we can use Figma, yes, particularly Figma. And we've got efficient handovers to web developers. So when you click on the components in Figma and XD, it gives you like the maths, the color coding, the dimensions, and it just makes it a bit quicker, more efficient versus something like a Photoshop where you've sketched it out. And is the developer reading your rectangle in Photoshop, or are they going to eyeball it? The reason we've been running with Figma lately is Figma is web-based, so there's no software required. You can edit it on a browser. Also means you don't need to send files to somebody else, which is a problem we were having with XD at one point, is we were trying to send like 500 megabyte files. There may be a more efficient way of doing it. I know you can use Creative Cloud, but that has storage capacity. So Figma, web-based, on your browser. You can have multiple people collaborating it on the same time, so you don't have version control issues, you're all editing the same thing. And you can share a live web prototype with your clients, and you can update it in the middle of that call with a new color or logo, or change it as they're discussing it, and it happens in live time on the demo. Any more questions on the benefits?
Yes,
Yes.
I do actually.
Mm-hmm.
So given the fact that there's kind of multiple different CMS platforms that you can host your website on these days, which allow for kind of different sort of builds and different capacity in terms of like the design of the actual sort of Figma prototype. Is there any limitations in terms of whether Figma works better with WordPress or any of the other CMS systems, or is it just kind of standardized?
So what I would say is we've been using Figma as a completely bespoke build. So everything that we're designing, the developers are making to that dimension. Like you say, there are other options where you might have a WordPress platform where you actually need, and maybe it's got a theme or you've got some components pre-made, and you'd be working backwards, because in that case, you've already got pre-made elements, and then you've got to create those elements in the design software to build the whole web page. So it does slightly depend on your approach. We've been doing completely bespoke stuff, which means we have no real limits. But yes, if you were doing something and you already had a WordPress template in mind or an existing template, you'd have to go back, like reverse engineer it so that you could build an entire website using pre-existing components. In terms of whether it affects the build out on the back end, if you're doing something completely bespoke, I don't think it really matters. Like, it's the developer's just taking the look and feel and building it however they want to. So there doesn't have to be any problem between how it's built and how you're designing it. But if you wanted to go with a particular theme that was already designed, you'd have to reverse engineer and you could build out.
I just wanted to add one thing. Because I started with Sketch a couple years ago, and so I am very familiar with Sketch. And if you are familiar with Sketch, or I'm assuming this would also work with XD, if you want to start your project on XD or on Sketch, you can also just import it into Figma, and it works really well. I haven't had much issue with it translating layers, etc.
Yeah, I think the limitation with Sketch is that is it Mac or Windows based?
No, it's or at least I use it on a Mac. I don't know about Windows, but I think the biggest limitation I found with Sketch is that it's not like online. So you have like kind of a native file. So I totally get Figma, and I think that that's the best approach for collaborative working and remote working. But if you do end up having more experience with XD and you just feel like, oh, I just want something really quick and not use Figma, it's easily transferable into Figma.
Yeah. And what I will say is I've been doing this less than a year. I think I did a day and a half on Sketch, started a project in Sketch, then something came back and I ended up learning Figma for the next week, and then picking up XD when some developer sent through some files. So I think the aim of this course is the kind of teachings that we're going to have in this are largely applicable to all of them: design systems and design thinking when you're creating these components so that they are scalable and editable. And that will serve you well in all of the software. But at the moment, I'm championing Figma because I think these benefits of web-based, collaborative, and the shareable prototypes is the most useful version of these softwares that we have. Cool. We are going to jump over now. This is kind of a quick intro to the software itself. So we're going to do a quick overview of the different panels and tools, and then the idea is that anybody who wants to can take this file away, and there is a piece of homework to learn to explore the software. So I'm going to do a quick intro. I'm going to look at my notes on this side. So it's the same as if you've got the app version or the web version, this layout is exactly the same. On the left-hand side, you have these places where your work exists. So you have pages, which are these just big, endless expanses where you can put your frames and artwork. You can have as many pages as you want. I normally suggest 2, which is one where you're editing and building the website, the app, and one where you're building out components, typography that forms your design system. So 2 pages. And then you have like your layers of components. So we've got the frame is your top level. You've got 1, 2, 3, and 4 here. We have 4 things on our layer palette. And if we click down, we get a nested menu. So on desk 1, we've got a group. That group consists of a text box and a lower text box. And it's all just a combination of grouping and framing and how these different elements interact with each other. How do we decide how the elements interact with each other is the other side of the screen. So the left-hand side is like where stuff exists. And the right-hand side is where you set the variables and the controls of these elements. This right-hand side is split into your design window, which is the one you use most of the time. A prototyping window so that you can connect and click things together. And then the inspect window that I never look at, but that's the one where when you're clicking on something, it tells you the height, tells you the colors, tells you the typography, more like a dev tool to inspect the elements. Within this is contextualized. So if I click nothing, this right-hand side is global settings, and I can change the background of this. If I click on a frame, I get a load of contextual menus for the frame, dimensions, layouts, grids I can put on, colors and fills. And if I click on text on groups, it's how the group interacts. If I tick on just the text box, get the ability to change the fonts and colors. So it's completely contextualized on that right-hand side. And then just to quickly walk through the controls at the top, we've got our ability to click and move stuff. We've got frames. If you're familiar with Illustrator, that's like an artboard. Frame is basically your screen. It could be a desktop size. Your frame could be a phone size. And if we go into frame, you can just insert a load of pre-made size ones. We're generally working on desktops, so that's fine for us. We've got the ability to draw some shapes, rectangles, lines. They are sort of like vector-based, so you can edit and play with them. You can draw random shapes using the pen tool, again, very similar to Illustrator. You've got the ability to put in text. This tool that helps you move around. If you've got a trackpad, you can just move around with your 2 fingers. And then what's really useful to have discussions back and forth with the dev is that you can pin and put notes in certain areas, and you can tag people who've shared the file with. And on this side, you've just got settings so that you can share your file, or you can play your file, and you can share just this clickable prototype. So there's 2 different shares. There's sharing the prototype, because it took me a while to learn this, and sharing the file itself. So for today, that's covering everything I wanted to do. Just an introduction to the tool. The homework, if you are interested, I can send you this file, is to create a wireframe of a 4-page portfolio. Got 4 pages here. So you can play with fonts, typographies, what would you want to display on a portfolio? Create a home page that has a clickable nav that takes you to the first project, the second project, and then a back page of the project. You can investigate and look into how to do nav buttons, a home button, next, previous. And your challenge is to turn that into a clickable prototype so that when you click play, I can click on the elements in the nav and it takes me to page 2, takes me to page 3. So you can play with it, make it look good, beautiful, or you can just do very basics. But a bit of an introduction just to get you experimenting with the tools. Any questions on the control panel and software Figma?
Can you connect like Adobe fonts?
I've been able to get all the fonts that are system fonts appear, but I'm not 100% about Adobe fonts. I have to investigate and see. Good question.
And does Figma embed everything as well? So like all your images, everything is all the AW file.
So if you wanted to do a quick demo, if you had a frame for an image, you can change the fill setting from solid to a gradient, radial gradient, diagonal gradient, or to an image, and then you can do choose image. And you can drop something in. That's not a good example because it's white. And then within that, you can fill, you can do fit, drop, but they will be embedded on there. You don't need to keep a folder of links.
Amazing.
And can you also design a web and mobile version at the same time?
So you can have them on the same sheet here and modify them but you wouldn't be able to prototype them. So what happens is if you build a prototype, this is one of the risks, if you connect these two screens, you'll only be able to see those two screens in the prototype. So normally I would build them as two separate pages, or I might start on the same page, get some things established, and then separate them into two separate pages.